Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Praxis Guild. So glad you tuned in for this YouTube video. Today's video, we're going to be talking about Essential Skills series, and specifically we'll be talking about document use. So if you've ever wondered what we mean by document use, stay tuned. Hi everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Praxis Guild. This is the Essential Skills series, and then specifically this one is about document use. And when we talk about document use, we're talking primarily about those documents that you would need in the job site or wherever you are in your trade's location to be focusing in on and knowing not just what to read, but how to read it. And so today is a bit of an overview on that, and I wanted to do a couple things with you in regards to the presentation today, and hopefully at the end of it, you'll have a better understanding of what we mean by the document use and essential skills. So let's get started. So the Essential Skills series is really all about dealing with specifically blueprints and specification sheets and schematics. Now, some of you in the trades may not be in the building trades or in construction trades. You may be in a service trade like cooking or hairstyling. You may be in some heavy industry trades such as millwright or industrial mechanic or heavy-duty operator or equipment mechanic. So there's going to be some overlap. There'll be some gaps depending on which trade you're in. But essentially, what we're talking about in essential skills, there we go again, is this idea of using documents and getting comfortable with using them. So there's some common terms that I want to bring to your attention, and one of the first common terms that we're dealing with is schematics. And when we talk about schematics, we're really talking about wiring diagrams, not necessarily ladder diagrams. That might be a different video that we touch on later on, but schematics can be hand-drawn. They can be computer-assisted drawings, so CAD drawings, and they're basically showing you not only the wiring connections that have to go on with a particular piece of equipment, but they're showing you pathways, and schematics are really, really useful when we're doing some troubleshooting. So, for instance, this schematic happens to be one where we would see a gas or an electric element. Could be a stove, it could be a hot water tank, it could be another piece of equipment. That's regardless of what we're talking about here today. But a schematic looks something like this. And so on the schematic, you would need to be familiar with some of the symbols on it to understand what they mean and what the drawing is trying to convey to you. Because again, when we're talking about documents, we're talking about a language, and whether they're blueprints or whether they're BIM images or whether they're AutoCAD images, whether they're schematics, wiring diagrams, they are communicating to us in a language, and some of that language is very easy to understand, but the key to that language is understanding symbols. And so maybe in a future video we'll break down what those symbols are and what they mean, but you can see here that they've included words to go along with the symbol to help us understand what they are. They've even color-coded some of the wires to help us trace it easier. Not all schematics are like that, but really the schematic shows you the relationships between different components in a device, which is very helpful for us, especially when we're trying to figure out why it's not working. Another common term that we find when we're talking about document use, especially when we're talking about blueprints, whether they're digital or whether they're analog, is a schedule. Now, a schedule isn't necessarily the schedule that we would have for the project or for a particular piece of that project. A schedule, when we're talking about prints, often refers to a list of items that we can cross-reference in between different pages or different sets of prints. And so in this drawing here, I've shown you a snapshot of a particular piece of a drawing, and it shows you in this case some doors, so door type A, B, C, D, and E. And you'll notice here that in this schedule they tell you not only what door type it is with this specific detail, but they tell you where it comes from, like who's the manufacturer. They also tell you, they may also tell you where it's coming from in the sense of which part of the building are you coming out of and which part of the building are you going into when you use this door. They'll also tell you things such as what is the door made of? How many hinges will it have? What kind of hardware does it have? Does it have a window? Does it have a safety window? All these things, all these details will be listed out in the schedule. And you can see down here, there's a finishing schedule by room listing. So you can see here that in the washroom, the flooring is sheet vinyl. It's not tile, it's sheet vinyl. The base is going to be an integral coved base, so that could be a glue-on base, or it could be something that is nailed and into place. You'll also notice that on the walls, we're going to have some drywalls. They call it gypsum. There's going to be some drywall. It'll be painted, and they actually tell you the color coordination that goes with that. So in some cases, a room may have carpet. It may have hardwood. It may have a different kind of base on the floor. It may even have a different wall or multiple wall coverings. It could have drywall. It could have tile. There could be drywall with wallpaper. And so these things now become important for us when we look at the job overall to help us break down the things that we need to take care of and be aware of when we're doing our job. So that's a basic schedule. Now, when we talk about specification sheets, what we're talking about is that specific things, equipment or components in a job or in a small piece of a job will have information on them that you should know. And so before we get into orthographic projection, I kind of want to bring over for you a specification sheet on a zone valve that we typically use in the heating industry. And so you can see here that it gives us a picture. And like in the other video that we talked about in regards to the reading, you don't just want to take this, throw it up and crumple it up and throw it away. You want to reference it. Sometimes if you're like me, you want to put it into a binder and reference it later because sometimes you run into these valves once or twice a year, or maybe they're a common valve that you run into all the time, or they may have a different mounting or a different motor control that you want to be aware of. So when we look at these, you can tell that they have these different drawings on them. And in fact, these are called orthographic projections, and I'll explain that in a little bit. They also show you a schedule here. In regards to the model number that you're using, the voltage that they require. They will also show you the size of the body and will show you what type of connection they have. So in this particular specification sheet, they're not just telling you information about the model number and what it is. They're giving you a drawing. They're giving you some details about that drawing so you can install it correctly. And they also provide a schedule for you to understand and reference to if you need to order another one, or if you are dealing with multiple pieces, or if you want to change the connection on some of these. And so these are really, really important documents to have, not only on the job site, but sometimes in your van or digitally. You can hold on to them because this is a PDF, and so now it becomes really super easy to store them. And so we'll let that rest down there. And so those are specification sheets. And so when we look at orthographic projection, like I mentioned before, on drawings, on blueprints, or like a schematic book that I just showed you, they may show you details in orthographic projection. Now, the key thing with orthographic projection is that they show you 2 to 3 different views that we call them: front or elevation, plan view, which is like from the top, or a right and left view, or a combination of those. And so the key again with those views is that it helps us understand the relationship of the component to its surroundings, particularly how are we going to connect to it. And so let me show you a simple illustration of this. And this is what we would call a 3-inch Victaulic 90, and we would install this on a piping system. And so you can see here, we're looking down on top of it. But the thing with orthographic projection is that this may not be the plan view. It could be the front view or the elevation view, or it could be the right view. And so if you're in trades training, specifically if you're in any kind of piping trades, you may have heard these terms before. And when we look at the actual drawing of this particular 90 in orthographic projection, if we're talking about a front view, this would be the drawing for it from the front. So we're standing like this, and we're looking at the front of that fitting. Now, the plan view would be this, in the sense of if you were to hover above that 90 and look down on it, this is how it would be drawn. And then if you were to move to the right of that drawing and look at it face on, this is what you would see. And again, if you want to understand what these symbols mean, obviously, in the piping trades, you would become familiar with these drawings. Maybe in a future video, I'll explain those as well. Again, this is just to highlight some of the views or some of the things that you'll see on your documents. This here is a fryer that you would see in a commercial kitchen. And so with this fryer, you're going to get a specification book. You're going to get some specification sheets that will tell you a lot of information about the piece of equipment. But more importantly, what we're keying in on is how do we install it. And so here's an example of that orthographic projection of this piece of equipment. So you can see here on the left-hand side, they call this the top view. This is what it would look like if you were to hover above this piece of equipment and look down upon it. And you can see that they give us some dimensions here. This is the front view, so if you were to stand in front of it and perhaps kneel down and look at it, this is what it would look like. And again, they're going to show you some details on this. Importantly, the size of the unit, and sometimes they'll give it to you in metric like they did here in centimeters. Sometimes they'll tell you what it is in imperial, in inches, or they'll give it to you in millimeters. It doesn't really matter. You should be able to transfer back and forth between them pretty easily. And then over here, they call this a side view. And so, again, they're going to show you some different aspects of this piece of equipment in the side view. Most importantly, you can see here that these dotted lines here indicate what's going on inside of this piece of equipment. So you can't really see this when you're standing over here looking at the piece of equipment from here. You can't see this stuff inside because this all blocks it. But on the drawing, they're going to indicate it by a dotted line so that you know what's there. Okay, so that is in essence what some specification sheets may look like for a piece of equipment. Now, getting to prints, there are some typical prints that we would deal with primarily in the construction trades as well. And they are architectural prints, they are electrical prints, they are mechanical prints, or they could be labeled plumbing prints. And then there's what we call a plan or a site print. And these are the four main ones. They're not the only ones. There are subsets of these. But these would be the four main ones that we're talking about. And so let's start off with the architectural drawings. And architectural drawings are what we call in the industry kind of the Bible of the print world. They are the go-to resource when we want to know the relationship of everything on the job site. And so when there's a conflict between one trade and another trade in regards to space or what's supposed to go where, we would often refer back to the architecturals to tell us the relationship of the pieces of equipment or the things that we're trying to install. And so architecturals usually have a lot of detail on them. They have a lot of notes on them. They'll have a lot of reference points like you can see here. And they will show us the relationship of everything in the room. And then when we look at other drawings, it will begin to break those things down for us just in those specific trades. So when we look at electrical prints, for instance, they're only going to have the electrical components and devices on those prints. So in fact, you can see here that they've listed out the lights. They show us where they are. They may show us some wiring schematic or a wiring detail. They may show us the place of switches and plugs. But that's it. That's all they're going to show. They're not going to show you any mechanical necessarily. They're not going to show you any architectural stuff necessarily, although you can see them showing some architectural details here in light colors. They're not going to be bold like these ones that are easy to see, because they're going to tell you that a staircase is here, but that's not the highlight of this particular print. So that's electrical. Then when we look at the mechanical drawings, they're going to be a little more detailed in regards to the mechanical components on a particular job. So that could include heating, ventilation, air conditioning, plumbing, steam, hot water heating, duct work, controls. Those would all be in the mechanical drawings. Now, sometimes if a job is big enough, each one of those will have their own set of drawings, and they all relate to each other. But in most cases, you're going to have a mechanical or a plumbing or an HVAC drawing, and that's probably about it. And so again, you can see here that there's some symbols on here that you're going to want to become acquainted with. There's going to be some grid line numbers that you'd want to know. There'll be some notes on here that you want to take care to note, and then they're going to show you the placement of where certain things are in regards to the mechanical equipment in this space. Okay, so that's the mechanical side of it. The last one that I wanted to highlight for you is what we call a plan or a site view of the entire job. And so this would be an example of a site plan. And what they're doing for us is they're showing us the relationship of the building or the buildings in relationship to the site or the plot of land that it's resting on. And in some cases, they'll even show us the topographical levels of the ground, but they will show us some landscaping ideas. So in this case, you see here where the parking lots are. You may see that this new building in relationship to the existing building, or in relationship to the busy streets, or what is this site going to look like when it's going to be done. I've heard some people call these concept drawings in regards to this is what the concept will look like when it's completed. And so one thing to remember is that plans are plans and they can change. Typically, there is no job out there that is built entirely by spec and by plan without any changes. So we have to keep in mind that even though these prints are done and many people spend many hours putting these together, they do change. So the four typical ones that we'll see, again, just let me recap for you, are architectural, mechanical, electrical, and a site plan or a plan just in of itself. And so to kind of round out this piece, there's some common documents that I wanted to highlight just in mentioning to you in this video that we should be aware of. So blueprints and schematics, I've already highlighted those for you. And again, these could be hard copies, actual print paper in front of you, and the print paper could be large. It could be 8.5 by 11. It could be as much as 2 feet by 3 feet or 2 feet by 4 feet, depending on what we're doing. But they could also be digital, and there's a lot of movement out there to take our drawings digitally, because then we can carry them in a laptop or on a tablet. Especially, we can take snapshots of them and use them in emails. It's just a lot easier to deal with. But on the job site, you can't necessarily take a tablet with you or a laptop with you because it might be too dangerous in regards to dropping it, getting it wet, getting it dusty, and all that other stuff. So you might have some paper hard copies with you. So some sites will have both. There's some specification sheets, so I've already gone over those with you in regards to equipment or the relationship of components to a particular job. There's also what we call request for informations, or RFIs. So if there's something on the prints or in the plans that we don't really have enough information on, we can submit a request for information, and those go through a certain amount of channels, communication channels, and it's an official document, and we would get an answer to that RFI, and then we would document that answer, and then that answer would guide us through the installation process. There's something that we call change orders. So if something was to change on the job site, we want to make sure that we document that change. We just don't want to go ahead and do it. And primarily with a change orders come sometimes, most often, after an RFI. So we would submit a request for information, more detail. We want to know some more information behind the reasons why this is this way. And then if it's not going to work, based on what we're told, we can submit a change order, and then that change order would go through some of the same channels that an RFI would go through. It would get approved, and then we would do the installation. There's also memos and emails, and most of us are familiar with those. Those can be paper copy or electronic. Emails obviously are electronic, but we can print them out, store them hard copies or not. We can keep them electronically. Permits. A lot of our permits now can be submitted electronically and received electronically. Some of them we still have to go down to the city halls of where we're working and do them in person. There'll be detail drawings as well. So in the mechanical or in the architectural specifically, there'll be sections of the drawings where they show us details of connection points of the building or connection points between equipment and systems. There'll be spool sheets, for instance, where if we're having a bunch of pipe prefabricated, or if we're going to have a mechanical room prefabricated, the spool sheet is the sheet that we use to determine how much pipe we need to cut, what size is it, what connection points are there. So spool sheets can be something that you run into as well. Toolbox meetings is a common document now on most job sites, if not all job sites. And a toolbox meeting is simply a document that we use to record our safety meetings, and those can happen every morning or once a week, and those are required to be on site in both hard copy and electronic copy. So those are some common documents that you may run into, and these are common documents that you'll need to begin using and being able to use them effectively in what we need to do to get our job done. So again, this Essential Skills series is about document use. So we went through some common terms. We did some looking at some specific sheets and some schematics and some schedules. We looked at orthographic projection a tiny bit. We looked at 4 basic typical prints that we're going to find on a job site, and then some common documents we highlighted for you as well. So again, if you like this video, please be sure to subscribe, hit that like button, ring that bell so that when the new YouTube video gets loaded up, you'll get notified right away. And if there's anything that I missed in here, or if there's something that you want me to comment on in more detail, leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, take care and keep practicing.